Atlas Shrugged, Detailed Retelling, Part 1, The System's Collapse. The novel takes place in an alternate future, united, states where the economy is collapsing due to increased government intervention. The country is ruled by bureaucrats who preach collectivism and public good, while suppressing individual initiative and free enterprise. The protagonist is Dagny Taggart, the operating vice president of Taggart Transcontinental Railroad Company. She is one of the few competent executives trying to maintain railroad operations despite growing government restrictions and the incompetence of her brother James, the company's nominal president. James represents the new generation of businessmen who achieve success not through ability, but through political connections and lobbying. Dagny faces a critical situation. The railroad line in Colorado, vital for transporting products from the state's thriving businesses, is in disrepair. The existing rails are made of substandard steel supplied by Associated Steel, a company that won contracts through political influence rather than product quality. Seeking a solution, Dagny turns to Hank Reardon, owner of steel mills and inventor of a new alloy called Reardon Metal. This revolutionary material surpasses regular steel in all parameters, but faces resistance from traditional manufacturers and government officials who consider it untested and dangerous to public welfare. Reardon embodies Ayn Rand's ideal entrepreneur. He built his empire with his own hands, guided by reason and hard work. However, he's surrounded by people who parasitize his achievements. His wife Lillian despises his work and considers money dirty. His brother Philip constantly asks for financial help for dubious charitable projects, and his mother reproaches him for selfishness. Dagny and Reardon make a deal for the new metal to reconstruct the Colorado Railroad line, which Dagny renames the John Galt line after a mysterious man whose name is increasingly heard in conversations, though no one knows who he is. The phrase, "Who is John Galt?" becomes a popular expression of hopelessness and uncertainty. Meanwhile, society faces a growing crisis. Talented people begin disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Ellis Wyatt, an oil field owner, vanishes after destroying his wells. Ken Daniger, a coal mine owner, disappears. Each disappearance brings economic upheaval. Businesses close, jobs vanish, production declines. The government responds to the crisis by tightening control. New laws are passed limiting business profits, establishing fair shares of production, and redistributing resources to less fortunate competitors. A system of directives and emergency measures is created, effectively transforming the free economy into a centrally planned one. Dagny and Reardon not only collaborate in business, but begin a love affair. Their relationship is a union of two outstanding minds who find equals in each other. However, society condemns their liaison, especially Reardon's wife, who uses their relationship for emotional manipulation. The first test of the John Galt line is successful. The train on new Reardon metal rails achieves record speed, proving the new material's superiority. However, success generates even greater envy and opposition from competitors and officials. The climax of the first part is the passage of Directive 10 to 289, a law that effectively freezes the entire country's economy. According to this directive, all workers must remain at their jobs. All companies must maintain current production levels, and all prices and wages are fixed at existing levels. Patents and inventions are declared public property. In response to this directive, many talented people decide to strike, not in the traditional sense of a workers' strike, but by completely withdrawing from the economic system that exploits them. Part 2. The Search for the Vanished. The economic situation in the country continues to deteriorate. Directive 10-289 not only failed to stabilize the economy, but accelerated its degradation. Enterprises deprived of the ability to develop and compete gradually fall into decline. Product quality decreases, innovation ceases, and work motivation disappears. Dagny becomes increasingly puzzled by the mysterious disappearances of talented people. She begins her own investigation, trying to understand if there's any pattern to these vanishings. Her attention is drawn to a strange phrase that some people utter before disappearing. They speak of a man who convinced them to leave. During one of her trips, Dagny discovers an abandoned factory where revolutionary motor once operated on atmospheric electricity. This motor could have solved the country's energy crisis, but its inventor disappeared, leaving only a prototype. Dagny decides to find this inventor and convince him to return. Meanwhile, Hank Rearden faces growing government pressure. He's accused of violating various directives and threatened with nationalization of his mills. James Taggart plays a particularly active role in persecuting Rearden, seeing the successful metallurgist as a threat to his position. Rearden undergoes a trial for unfair profit-making and selfish behavior. At the trial, he delivers a speech rejecting the moral basis of the charges against him. He declares that he's proud of his achievements and doesn't consider earning profit from honest work reprehensible. His speech strongly impresses those present, but the legal system is already so corrupted that a fair decision is impossible. At this time, a mysterious radio program appears in the country. An unknown person broadcasts a long speech explaining the causes of economic collapse and calling on people of reason to stop supporting the system that exploits them. This speech shocks listeners, but authorities quickly block the transmission and begin searching for the terrorist, as they call the unknown orator. Dagny continues her search for the motor's inventor. Her investigation leads her to Professor Robert Stadler, an outstanding physicist now working at a government scientific institute. Stadler recognizes in the motor's description the work of his former student, but refuses to help Dagny find him, claiming that science should serve society, not private interests. The search leads Dagny to a small town where she meets the inventor's wife. The woman tells her a tragic story. Her husband worked at a factory where workers decided to implement the communist principle, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. The result was catastrophe talented workers had no incentives for productive work, while less capable ones received undeserved benefits. The factory went bankrupt, families broke apart, and the inventor disappeared, leaving only a note: "I am on strike against my brothers." This story opens Dagny's eyes to the true nature of what's happening. She understands that the disappearances of talented people aren't coincidental, but an organized protest against a system that turns human abilities into tools for exploitation by others. Meanwhile, Rearden's situation becomes critical. The government intensifies pressure, demanding he transfer the Rearden medal formula to the state. His wife Lillian conspires with government officials, providing them with compromising information about her husband in exchange for social recognition among progressive intellectuals. The second part's climax comes when Dagny, pursuing a plane she suspects might lead her to the vanished people, crashes in the Colorado mountains. She finds herself in a hidden valley where she discovers a utopian community of all the talented people she had been seeking. This valley, called Galt's Gulch, represents an ideal society based on principles of reason, individualism, and free exchange. There's no government in the traditional sense, no coercion or exploitation. People work and trade with each other based on mutual benefit and honesty. In the valley, Dagny meets all the vanished geniuses. Ellis Wyatt, who here grows vegetables using new technologies. Ken Daniger, who mines coal with more efficient methods. The motor's inventor, who here freely develops his ideas. They all live modestly but happily, enjoying the fruits of their labor, without fear of expropriation or coercion. The leader of this community is John Galt himself, the man whose name became a symbol of uncertainty. Galt is a philosopher and inventor who organized the strike of minds, convincing talented people to leave a world that turned their abilities into instruments of their own enslavement. Part 3. The Philosophy of Rebellion. John Galt explains his philosophy and goals to Dagny. He argues that talented, productive people are the real Atlases who hold the entire world on their shoulders. However, society treats them as sacrificial animals who must work for others, benefit without receiving recognition or fair compensation in return. Galt organized a strike not of workers against capitalists, but of people of reason against the system that exploits them. His goal is to show the world what happens when productive people stop supporting a parasitic system. Without their knowledge, inventions, and entrepreneurial energy, civilization begins to crumble. In the valley, Dagny becomes acquainted with a unique social system. Only one law operates here, the principle of non-interference with others' rights. Each person lives for themselves and trades with others based on voluntary exchange of values. No one has the right to coerce another or demand unearned benefits. The valley's economic system is based on the gold standard, a symbol of objective value and honest exchange. Money here isn't the root of evil, as claimed in the outside world, but represents an instrument of fair exchange between productive people. Dagny spends a month in the valley observing this community's life. She sees how people work with enthusiasm and creative energy, knowing that the fruits of their labor belong to themselves. There's no bureaucracy, social parasites, or forced wealth redistribution. Particularly striking to Dagny are the relationships between people in the valley. There's no envy or malice characteristic of the outside world. People sincerely rejoice in each other's successes, understanding that in a system of voluntary exchange, one person's success means benefit for everyone else. Galt offers Dagny to stay in the valley forever, but she refuses. She feels responsible for the railroad and believes she can still save the outside world from collapse. Galt warns her that the system is doomed to destruction and all her efforts will only prolong the agony, but he respects her decision. Returning to the world, Dagny discovers the situation has worsened further. The economy continues collapsing. The government introduces increasingly draconian control measures and public morality degrades. People lose the ability for productive work and increasingly rely on government handouts. Reardon, meanwhile, faces attempted complete nationalization of his mills. The government uses compromising information provided by his wife against him, threatening public scandal. However, Reardon finds strength to reject the blackmail, publicly acknowledging his relationship with Dagny and declaring he's proud of it. This act symbolizes an important philosophical principle: rejection of false morality that makes people ashamed of their virtues and hide their achievements. Reardon no longer wishes to play by the rules of a society that turned virtue into vice and vice into virtue. The government desperately tries to stop economic collapse, but all its measures only accelerate destruction. Rationing cards are introduced for basic goods. Freedom of movement is restricted. Strict censorship is established. The country increasingly resembles a totalitarian state. Under these conditions, more talented people decide to join Galt's strike. They understand that attempts to reform the system from within are hopeless. The system is based on false principles and cannot be corrected by partial measures. Dagny long resists this conclusion, but gradually comes to understand Galt's correctness. She sees how her efforts to maintain the railroad are used by the government to strengthen the totalitarian system. Each of her successes becomes an instrument for even greater enslavement of people. The turning point is a catastrophe caused by government incompetence, but for which authorities blame the private sector. Dagny understands she can no longer be complicit in a system that turns her abilities into instruments of destruction. Part 4. The Triumph of Reason. Economic and social collapse reaches a critical point. The government, having lost control of the situation, makes a desperate attempt to capture John Galt and force him to save the crumbling system. They believe that if they can compel the best minds to return to work, the economy will recover. Galt falls into the authorities' hands, but not by accident. He consciously allows himself to be arrested to gain the opportunity to address the nation with a televised speech. In this speech, lasting several hours, he presents the complete philosophy of Objectivism and explains the reasons for the strike. Galt explains that the foundation of human life is reason, and the foundation of society is voluntary exchange between rational individuals. He shows how altruistic morality, demanding self-sacrifice for others, actually destroys both those who sacrifice and those for whom they sacrifice. He explains the true nature of money as a symbol of honest exchange and debunks the myth that money is the root of evil. On the contrary, money is an instrument of justice that allows people to trade value for value without resorting to coercion or deception. Galt calls on people to reject the morality of self-sacrifice and accept the morality of rational egoism, not in the sense of mindless selfishness, but in the sense of rational care for one's true interests, which include honesty, productivity, and justice. After the speech, the government tries to force Galt's cooperation using torture and threats. However, he remains steadfast, demonstrating the strength of a man who lives according to his principles and yields to no coercion. Meanwhile, Dagny, Reardon, and other Galt supporters organize his rescue. This operation symbolizes the triumph of reason and individualism over coercion and collectivism. They don't use violence for violence's sake, but apply force to defend an innocent person from aggression. After Galt's liberation, the government system finally collapses. Officials, deprived of productive people's support, prove incapable of managing even the simplest processes. Power plants fail, Transportation stops working, chaos begins. But this chaos isn't the strike's goal, it's merely a necessary stage of purification. Galt and his supporters don't seek destruction for destruction's sake. They want to clear space for a new, rational society. In the novel's final scenes, we see the beginning of restoration. People freed from the parasitic system begin building a new society on principles of reason, individualism, and free exchange. Dagny finally joins the strike, understanding that only complete rejection of the old system can lead to real progress. The novel ends with a symbolic scene. John Galt stands on a mountain, surveying the valley where a new civilization is being built, and traces the sign of the dollar in the air, a symbol of honest exchange and human achievement. Atlas has finally shrugged, casting off the burden of a world that didn't value him, and is ready to carry a new world, a world worthy of his efforts. Thus, Ayn Rand's novel presents a philosophical drama about the confrontation between individualism and collectivism, reason and coercion, productivity and parasitism. It's a story about what happens when society stops valuing its best representatives, and how these representatives can change the world by simply refusing to support the system that exploits them. What book are we reading next? Write in the comments.